That's a fascinating topic. How much time do we have?
You ask 5 people and what they mean by design strategy, you're going to get 5 different responses.
Why not have the people that are actually doing the work be the translation layer?
Hi everyone, welcome again to the hot new episode of our Design Diaries. And today I'm super thrilled to have Itamar with us. Itamar, welcome to the show.
Hi, Aaron. Thanks for having me.
Hey, let's get the show on the road. Tell me a little bit about Itamar, about your journey in design so far.
Yeah, so currently I'm the VP of Design Strategy for SuccessFactors. You might sound a bit fancy, but basically what it does is I'm helping product managers translate their strategy to what does it mean for the experience, right? So there's quite a lot of trying to understand the pain of the product management organization, trying to understand what are the problems they're trying to solve, and then use the design methods to translate that into things that the product teams can use for their, like creating backlogs and creating Jira tickets and so on.
So how did you what's your progression been in this design journey? Of course, you're right now working for SAP and you're saying you're supporting the SuccessFactors product line. Prior to that, you've had some foray in design. So can you tell us a little bit about your journey prior to
Yeah,
this?
sure. Yeah, well, my original background is graphic design, and I mean, back in the day, you go to school to learn to do things like posters and banners and business cards and stuff. That's what I thought I was going to do at university, but then I realized that there's actually quite a lot of trying to understand the problems of people in order to create something, right? And definitely, from that experience as a graphic designer, I learned the importance of testing, because like you cannot print a poster, like 1,000 copies of a poster, just to realize that there's a typo. Then you have to throw all the 1,000 posters away. So this is the kind of skill I think I took onto my next role, which is like web design, where you needed to do, like, now you need to create a website, see if people are, like, if the website is working or not. Then you have to do a lot of interviews, a lot of testing. So that's how I got from graphic design to kind of user experience design. Then in 2009, I moved to China. Then that's where I think I transitioned completely to product design and user experience. I was doing like hardcore desktop software applications. At some point in that trajectory, I realized that a lot of teams get stuck, right? Let's say you're trying to create the best design, you're trying to have your design create a good impact on the world, but the teams get stuck on like what we should do now, which feature is more important. So that's where I realized that the importance of facilitating decisions becomes, like, I don't know, 90% of my job. So I didn't know back then, but that's what basically design strategy is, right? It's trying to create this framework where people just make better decisions in terms of like what problems we're trying to solve and for whom.
Hey, it's a fascinating journey from graphic design to design strategy. It's also interesting that you actually went through a journey of filling many different hats until you got to this point of design strategy. Talking about design strategy, that itself, the term is interesting and vague to some people, and I'm going to guess that if you ask 5 people and what they mean by design strategy, you're going to get 5 different responses. I mean, I have my own version of it. What's yours? How would you define design strategy?
In my mind, design strategy is a framework that helps teams make better decisions on what are the things that customers care about. It's not for the lack of ideas that teams cannot innovate. Like, people can come up with great ideas. It's just to say, if those ideas don't deliver any value to someone, they might find it interesting in the beginning, but then it goes in the shelf, right? So that framework of making better decisions that create business value, that's what I'm calling strategy. And then the design strategy is like it's a bit of the narrowing down into what does it mean for the experience of the product. So,
but won't you think, Itamar, that there's one school of thought about shouldn't every designer do some element of design strategy? Why do we need a specific role of a design strategist?
That's actually a very good question. I would imagine that every person in some degree of seniority. As you start as a designer, for example, if you think about individual contributor, as soon as your role starts becoming bigger, as instead of just working very narrowly in your feature, and you start to like taking like more responsibilities around, let's say maybe a whole section of a product, then you need this more holistic view on let's say the problem solving aspect of the design process, right? My observation, at least when I look at the work that designers do at SAP, is that should be the job of every designer as they grow in their career, right? But for whatever reason, some people are just not interested in this. I've seen a lot of designers that just care, they are more interested in the craft of design, right? So let's say they want to be the Figma expert. They want to, like, they are super fascinated by prototypes. So those people, I guess they are happy with not having to have that kind of intellectual curiosity around like the strategy and the business impact that your designs are creating. But I agree with you that I mean that should be the job of every designer once they get to some degree of seniority.
It's interesting when you talk about craft. I think that in my history so far, craft will take you to a particular point. And I guess the point I am on is, at the end of the day, I hope that every designer in any different competence you can think of, their goal is, the final outcome is, do users achieve some purpose, meaning, value out of the thing that we design? And so, craft obviously enables it, have a point of view, but it doesn't end with the craft. And I think that is a learning that obviously I learned over time in my career, and I, it looks like you're in the same vein. And I'd like to also counter by saying, hey, look, finding value of what the user needs, what the market needs, isn't that a product manager's job? Like, why do I have to do strategy work for a product or a solution when my main goal is to ensure that we build experiences that users can benefit from? But how is it that I, as a designer, can influence the product strategy? At the end of the day, there is a product and a solution, and they have a strategy. So what's your view on a design strategy contribution towards product strategy, and having a designer's voice in the product strategy conversation?
That's a fascinating topic. How much time do we have? Okay, so the way I see it is this: our products are becoming more complex, and the job of a product manager is becoming bigger, the scope of the work, right? Let's say now you need to worry about not just like the traditional, I think if you were to look at the role of product management 5 years ago, like it will be closer to what I think a lot of people still call product owners, right? Let's say you care about, hey, this is my little corner of the product. I'm responsible for the requirements on that piece of the world. In that sense, technically, the designer should probably be more on their lane, the traditional lane of, let's say, more on the craft, and then more on the interaction design side of the house. But I think it's becoming more complex, especially in enterprise software, right, where the product managers now need to worry about the business, right? Let's say, do we have KPIs that we need to meet? I think it's very hard for a business person to do this transition from all these super high level kind of strategic goals to the details that is required to describe, like, what does it mean for the experience, right? So from that perspective, one could argue that there's like a translation of the product strategy to design strategy. And I guess one could argue that could be a translation of the product strategy to the architecture of the product, right? So I think, I guess what I'm trying to get at is this: instead of having the product manager have to think through and do the explanation of the strategy that matches like the audience that they need to talk to, like the other legs of the stool, product design, architecture, UA, and so on. Why not have the people that are actually doing the work be the translation layer, right? So that's how I see it.
What's your thought on, in the progression of a journey of a designer, and again, I'm loosely using the word design to mean any competency in design, interaction design, visual design, user research, so on and so forth. As you scale up in your career, you start doing more of of leading and influencing, and then affecting business and user outcomes. And that's in general a progression that I have learned by doing, by just stumbling into things, right? No one actually, I didn't have the opportunity, or maybe I did, I didn't avail of it, of going and learning in school around the concept of strategy and how you can actually create strategy, the frameworks. What's your thought, like when you talk about frameworks of strategy, what's your go-to framework on if someone wants to learn about, okay, I want to help contribute to a strategy, what should I know?
Something that I realized, and the more I talk to people about this design strategy thing, is like, well, if you put the design strategy and business aside, there's, I think, a aha moment that I think the designers need to have, which is the following. We tend to be very empathetic with the end users, right? Let's say, oh, it's all about understanding the jobs to be done and what the problems that people have. But sometimes we don't use our own skills to learn the pains and the needs of the people we work with, right? You don't need to understand the business, but you definitely need to understand the pains of the product manager that you work with, right? If that team is stuck because the product manager needs help translating the business strategy into jobs to be done, someone's gonna have to do it, right? So that's how I see it. I see it as like a empathy problem also to solve from that perspective. Stepping out
people
of
and empathy problem, right?
Yeah.
That's what you said. But you also said an interesting thing, which I will click on. Jobs to be done. Now, there are different probably perspectives on how a design team, org, etc., ideates, conceptualizes, and defines and then builds products. Some go based on scenarios, some do it based on user stories, etc., and there's never a shortage of that, and all good things, right?
That's right.
Jobs to be done, obviously, is a very important, interesting framework. It sometimes seems common sense to me, but what's your take at, like, is jobs to be done and a framework that you think helps with not just the design strategy part of it? Maybe it does, definitely there, but also maybe providing some more clarity and focus on what actually matters.
So the way I look at jobs to be done is a way to describe needs of people without describing the technology on how to solve those needs, right? So, and which kind of helps get the team in a mindset where they don't jump too quickly to the solution. So from that perspective, it's actually probably a even more useful kind of framework when you are about to describe how we're going to solve someone's problem, right? So for example, the way that we've been trying to do this at SuccessFactors is to capture, like, for example, you have customer journeys, right? Let's say as is customer journeys. Like, so when we are to translate that into, like, what does the system needs to do? Like, what are the list of features that we need to create? Usually we spend this little time of, okay, on this one particular step on the journey, what is that the people are trying to do, right? So from that perspective, jobs to be done is actually a pretty good ideation tool, because it's a good way to frame the problem without trying to describe the solution. So it gives people creativity and also, let's say, create a little bit of a breathing room for people to not jump too quickly to the solution.
So what do you say to the school of thought which says, hey, we are in the world of cloud and faster delivery, why don't we just like ship it and then see how customers react to it and then ideate through it? Why do we really need to think through the detailed strategy? Because we don't know how customers are going to use it. They might have other paths of usage we didn't even consider. What's your point of view on that?
That's actually probably the most controversial thing I'll say into this talk, which is the following. Yes, customers might have a different opinion about which problems we should solve, right? But they are not the product managers, they are not designers, they're not software developers, right? They don't have a perspective on all the other thousands of customers that we have. So I think it's our job to make sure that we pick the right problems to solve, right? That's one aspect. The other aspect is if the iterative process, if shipping and then testing and then pivoting, if it doesn't work, if this was like if the cost was zero or at least near to zero, then let's go for it, right? It's probably faster to find if there's a good market fit by actually having real people using the whatever the solution we have. But the reality is, like, even with cloud now, it's still a pretty expensive exercise to try to stick spaghetti on the wall and see if it sticks, right? The third point I think that's probably good to think about strategy is this, that if it's based on real problems of real people, especially if you use jobs to be done on the mix, one could argue that those jobs are stable over time, right? So let's say, yeah, technology, for example, just look at AI, right? Every month you're seeing like a major development on things like ChatGPT and stuff. The technology evolves, but the jobs don't change over time. Like the reason why people listen to music is the same that people did like thousands of years ago. People still want to communicate with other people, people still want visibility on like what is the status of a transaction and stuff. So these things are going to be stable over time. So it's even more critical that you actually understand people's problems and then use the iterative process of building stuff with technology to find ways to solve those problems better. I guess that's the way I would frame it.
On that note, find steps to make it better. So, Itamar, fascinating conversation. I feel like we can go on for hours and days on this topic. I'm sure we'll have you back in this podcast at some point in time. We can go delve a little bit deeper. What I learned from you, just to summarize in my head, you have had a fascinating journey from graphic design all the way to design strategy. And you've reminded us that strategy is something that each designer will need to learn how to contribute to and adapt as so that we can affect business and user outcomes. And you believe that the jobs to be done framework is a very interesting way to visualize and measure impact on things that really matter. And as the days and technology evolves, the art and science of strategy still remains. So we got to stay on that. So connecting jobs to be done, design strategy, evolution of the art and craft of design, and learning new tricks in the book is something that we all love doing in this complex space of business software. With that, thank you so much for being on the show, Itamar. We'll have you back for sure.
Yeah, my pleasure. Thanks for having me.